welcome to The World We Want. Hi, I'm your host, Gerry Ellis. So what is the world you want? Like many of you, I think a lot about the world I want. A caring world, one of equity, sustainability, peace, social justice, freedom, health, happiness. All of that is a world I want. On the World We Want podcast, we talk to some of the great thinkers, creators, educators, and conservationists, as well as some of the newest voices driving change around the world. Our conversations are about the world they want and how they are working to build the world we all want. And what do they share in common? Environmental education, one of the most powerful tools for creating a more just and sustainable world. It inspires, enlightens, it influences attitudes, and most importantly, it drives us to become better guardians of the planet, caretakers of our community, and leads us to action. On this episode, we explore what at first might seem like strange bedfellows: personal well-being and global conservation. Intuitively, we know we are all connected to the environment. But as we cruise through the details of our daily lives, that connection can often seem distant, even irrelevant. But our next guest believes that that connection is supercharged by our own well-being. Joining me on The World We Want is Dr. Vik Mohan, a storyteller, teacher, a conservationist, and a practicing physician in the UK. For more than 20 years, he's worked to integrate health services with community-based marine conservation initiatives for the benefit of both people and the planet. Drawing upon his unique combination as a doctor and a conservation leader, Vik is a passionate advocate for the rights of communities, nature, and those protecting both. Vik sees personal well-being as the heartbeat of the global conservation effort. I'd like to welcome to The World We Want, Dr. Vik Mohan. Hi, Vik, and welcome to The World We Want. I'm super excited to have you on. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, Gerry, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. I'm excited about this.
I wanted to start with something that I was watching in kind of getting to know you a little bit better. I was watching a TEDx that you did. And in the very beginning of that TEDx, you referred to a 19th century doctor, Sir William Osler, and his famous saying of, if you listen to your patients, they will tell you their diagnosis. I absolutely love that line. I'm going to steal it and keep it. I think it's brilliant because I think we could apply that to everything in life. What a perfect launch pad for any kind of education that we get as human beings. It's just to listen. Tell me how that concept connects to your life and launched the way you think and the things that you do.
Yeah, well, wow, a wonderful thing to start with, Gerry. Yes, so, training to be a doctor, the importance of listening to your patient was instilled in us from the very beginning. But so much else of what I've done, the importance of listening I've been reminded of that importance. So I also train as a life coach. So the importance of listening came up again in my coaching training and in all of my work, working one-to-one with people, whether it's as a doctor or a coach or an educator. I've been reminded constantly of the importance of listening. And as you'll find out by the end of this podcast, Gerry, I do like to talk. But if I can just keep quiet for just a little bit sometimes and really remember to really listen and really deeply listen, I'm always amazed by what comes up. And you talk about Madagascar. And so when I first went to Madagascar in 2005, I went out there as a medical officer looking after the health of a conservation expedition team. And actually, I saw that the team were pretty healthy. I became interested in the health of the communities. And so the most powerful tool I had at my disposal was listening. What we found is when we just took the time to listen, when we had the courage to really listen rather than going to communities with our own agenda or preconceived ideas about solutions, when we really took the time to listen without an agenda, we were amazed by what we heard and deeply, deeply touched by what we heard. And the rest of my life has been about so much of the last 20 years has been about responding to what we heard.
Now that you brought up Madagascar, let's dive into that just a bit, because I have some experience with where you were in Madagascar, and Madagascar is such an amazing place to start with, but that particular section of coast is even more stunning, I think, than some places, because it's so stark, and you have, well, you describe it. It physically, and describe the people there for a second, because I think it's important to a couple of things I wanted to chat with you about.
So the people who live on the southwest coast of Madagascar, the communities that we partnered with, or that Blue Ventures continues to partner with, are the Vezu, the people of the sea. Or another definition for Vezu is to struggle with the sea. So these are communities whose identity is inextricably linked with the ocean. If they don't fish, they don't eat. Inland, it's incredibly dry, semi-desert. So agriculture is simply not possible in large parts of southwest Madagascar. So they rely on fishing for food, for income, and for cultural identity. And these are highly skilled sailors and fishers who've fished and lived sustainably for hundreds of years.
Well, yeah, and that's what I think is so fascinating about the place that you ended up, because it's so alien. The landscape they live on is these dunes, and it's I think as a human being, you look out across this vast ocean in front of them, and it seems empty. You look back on the landscape that they're living on, and it seems almost empty of these white dunes. And so they live in this land that certainly has fish, but it seems like a perpetual desert in front and behind them.
Right.
It's so alien to the world you came from. You arrive at a place like that. How do you shift the lens at which you see the world through? Because their world looks nothing like ours, but yet they're human beings just like we are. And to see that and make that connection to them and begin to understand their concerns, their well-being. What was that like?
Oh, God, that's such a good question, Gerry. I guess it comes down to seeing beyond the geography and connecting to them as people. And because we were working alongside them on the task of rebuilding fisheries, helping them to restore ocean life, because we were working alongside them and living alongside them, it became seeing beyond the huge difference in geography became a little bit easier, I guess. And we could see them as communities. We could connect with them as fellow humans, I guess. And I suppose being a doctor, always have an interest in health needs, how those are met. And so in some way I had that lens when I arrived there. And I was thinking, so where's the healthcare infrastructure? Where do the children go for vaccination? Where does health education get delivered? How do they get to a healthcare facility? And so to a degree, I had a bit of that lens that I was carrying when I arrived there as the kind of medic in the team. And that lens really, really shaped how I approached that community at the beginning.
So how did you approach it? What I think this is the reason I'm asking the question is because I'm personally fascinated by how to work with other communities, how to work with other people who are so often seem so vastly different than I am, and yet, or we as an organization are. And so you go in there and it's so easy to be overwhelmed by the difference.
Yeah.
And yet you've got to connect. Ultimately, you've got to connect with the sameness. Those things we all care so deeply about, the health of our children, our own health, our welfare, the people in our communities. So what are your first steps in doing that, or what did you learn in those first steps?
Yeah. So the first thing to say is it takes time. There's some things you just cannot shortcut, Because ultimately what you want to do is build trust and build understanding. And I think those things take time. So I was lucky that I was joining a team, an organization that had been in that area a while and had begun to build the trust of the communities that we were working with. So that made it easier. I also benefited from having people in the community, in the team, who were multilingual, so language wasn't too much of a barrier. And then it's just about getting alongside people and sharing your humanity, sharing something of your own life, sharing my own stories about what my life was like at home, what my challenges were, just sharing photographs of my friends and family, sharing experiences of of life at home. And I think it comes down to just being a human and really, really resolutely being a human and believing that ultimately we're all the same. That belief that actually we're all the same, really. For me was the kind of, in a way, a kind of guiding principle, and a humility and a curiosity. Wow, how do you eke out a living in this space that looks like a desert? How do you, wow, so you go fishing on a pirogue, you do that in an incredibly skilled way, but these pirogues haven't changed in their design for hundreds of years. How do you go fishing? How do so it was curiosity, it was humility, it was recognizing common humanity, it was piggybacking on the back of an organization that was already building trust and understanding. And recognizing the privilege of being able to do those things and making the most of that opportunity.
It's interesting you should mention time, because another guest we had on The World We Want, it was Jaime Gonzalez, who you may know, but if not, I'm sure you'll meet at the conference coming up here in the not too distant future. And one of the things he said was that he goes into any community and the first thing he establishes with them is, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here for time. Whether or not the project that we're doing will be here 2 years from now, I will be here. I will continue to come back to you. And building trust through that commitment of time. And I think what my experience in the world and working on film projects and other things is, communities are shocked when you come back to them, when you do invest the time. They're so used to people disappearing on them. So, yeah, especially outsiders coming in, spending some money, doing a project and then disappearing. And I'm thinking about the people who are listening to this podcast. So many of them are educators who work in, whether it's local communities or extended communities internationally, is learning how to approach that with the understanding of patience and time that it takes to get to know other people.
Yeah, and exactly. And when people make an effort to get to know you, it's a leap of faith, and they're investing in you, and to say, right, thanks very much, I've got everything I need, I'm off now. That's like a betrayal, really. And so this idea of investing, I love what you just shared about that practitioner, that you go into an area and say, I'm here to stay, and in some ways engaging in health services, which is what I ended up doing in Madagascar. There's an implicit commitment, because as a doctor, I would not go in, provide healthcare for a short period of time and saying, oh yes, I'm terribly sorry, my money's run out or my priorities have changed, I'm going now. That is so unethical, deeply unethical. And so I completely agree that making a commitment to a place, to a community, is really, really important if you want to engage meaningfully with them.
One word that's so applicable here and that you use a lot is well-being. Tell me what that means to you.
Gerry, I work a lot in well-being, and I find it a really difficult thing to define. And everyone defines it slightly differently. I mean, for me, I think I talk about being healthy and happy. I talk about thriving. And I find it I find it difficult to pin down any further than that, if I'm honest. I'm trying to come up with a definition. But for me, well-being is, I know I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. I'm doing well. And and intrinsically, even if we can't come up with the definition, we can say if we're doing okay. We can say, yeah, you know what, my well-being's okay. I'm doing okay. And that increasingly does become a focus of my work.
The reason I asked that is because in again doing some of the research before we had a chance to talk, that word continually came up in and around you, and it made me start thinking about the projects that I've worked on and that we are currently working on, and the well-being and what that means. And that was exactly it. I could never lock down. I'm stumbling right now because I can't lock down on it. I couldn't lock down on a definition. Every time I moved from one group that we work with to another group we worked with, the well-being seemed to travel in its own way to that group.
Right.
Maybe we could back up to those folks on the coast of Madagascar, and let's talk about well-being, what it meant to them, and then maybe you can share a couple of other places that you have worked and are working. I think it has a lot to do with this whole concept of our podcast, which is the world we want.
So the kind of model, the vision we had for communities on the southwest coast of Madagascar was thriving fishes, thriving oceans. And for me, thriving and well-being are inextricably linked. And for me, that's about security, experiencing abundance, having security of livelihoods, going fishing, knowing that you can rely on the fact that you will better feed your family, knowing that you can rely on the fact you will better do that tomorrow as well. So for me, that supports thriving and well-being, that security, that sense of abundance, knowing that your family will enjoy good health, knowing that your children will experience a good education. All of those things feed into the well-being of those communities. So it relates to food security, financial security, health and well-being, and education of your children. It's really multidimensional. And I think when we're doing the work well, we're addressing all the determinants of well-being for those communities, their livelihoods, their health, education, their security, their rights in all forms. So for me, well-being is a wonderful lens to think about working with communities like that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Albright from NAAEE. That was our host, Gerry Ellis, speaking with Dr. Vik Mohan about his experience in fostering mental, physical, and environmental health in communities around the world. This podcast is all about highlighting the change makers like Vik, who are using education to help create a more just and sustainable future for us all. The World We Want is a project of the North American Association for Environmental Education. You can learn more about our mission on our website at naaee.org. We'd also love for you to connect with us on social media. You can find NAAEE on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And if you're enjoying what you're hearing, please consider adding a rating, a review, or subscribing wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Now, back to Gerry and Vik to hear more about how well-being is at the epicenter of impactful work in conservation, education, and beyond.
The women really are the heart and soul of these communities. It's very easy, I think, as, we're both males. We walk into a community filled with males, and then they get in boats and leave. And now we're standing there with all these women and children who are the heart and soul of this community. Does well-being shift in your eyes when we talk about the men in the community and the women in the community and their roles?
Yeah, I think that comes down to needs and how their needs manifest and which needs are most salient. So, for example, thinking about those communities in Madagascar again, when we worked with men, their most salient need, what would address their well-being most, was livelihoods, ensuring that there's enough fish in the ocean, or enough natural resource for them to better fish and thrive. What we saw with the women in the community was that they really had poor access to healthcare and reproductive health services in particular. And poor reproductive health was really, really impacting their well-being dramatically, and impacting their ability to engage in society more broadly. So for the women, if we were serious about well-being, we had to start with reproductive health as the foundation.
Have you seen that replicated itself in other places you've worked?
Yes, very much so. So throughout the west coast of Madagascar, when we've worked with fishing communities, the unmet need for reproductive health services have come up for women again and again. On the east coast of Africa, when we've worked with partner organizations who've worked to replicate our models, they've also come across a huge unmet need for reproductive health services, and addressing those is often transformational. It improves the health of women. It enables women to better engage in fisheries management, and it helps build community trust for the work that we're doing.
We're back to that word again, trust. Yeah, it's that one seems like the hardest one is building trust in these in communities that you work with. Not you specifically, but just us. Somebody coming from the outside is establishing that bond of trust.
Yeah, and particularly if they have experience of people coming and going. How will you trust in those situations if that's what you've experienced? Why would you?
How did you in the case in Madagascar, but in general, I guess, how do you connect that to conservation for people? I mean, obviously, in your mind, that probably seems somewhat seamless at this point. That well-being, healthcare, and conservation. But I can see a lot of people might be saying, "Well, wait a second. I'm trying to save the species over here. How does that connect to what you're doing over here?"
Yeah.
How does that work?
So when we work with community, when I've worked with communities and spent time with communities, who are the front line of climate change, of biodiversity loss, they see these things as very much interconnected. So the barriers to addressing these things in a holistic, multi-sectoral way are often our own. We may have constraints that I've got money to do biodiversity conservation, and I've got to focus on that. I've got money to do healthcare, I've got to focus on that. When you ask communities, they don't see these things in silos at all. And they see the interconnection immediately, and they can articulate things really compellingly and powerfully because that's their lived experience. So it comes back to listening. Communities tell us how these things are interconnected. Women tell us that as a result of improvements in health, they're better able to engage in fisheries management. They're better able to engage in sustainable fisheries, for example. So they tell us these things.
I'm curious how much resistance you have found in others, organizations, just individuals, to trying to convey that concept, because it does seem, my own lived experience with working in those communities, it is seamless. They don't see it as a separate concept. And in fact, in many cases, I've found that they don't have even words for things like the environment or nature. It is them. They almost mentally stumble when you try to get them to see the environment as something separate. When you say, well, we're trying to save that nature over there, and they're going, "What? That is us." Like, what? I don't understand what you're talking about over there. But the flip side of that is that you come back and talk to, board of directors or CEOs or someone in organizations where you're trying to do the work, and they immediately put them in silos. How do you find that? Like, the reverse transition, not going there, but actually coming back and trying to explain the importance and value of healthcare education and well-being's role in conservation.
So, unfortunately, I find that pretty hard. And so, when I get the opportunity to share my lived experience of spending time with these communities, share some of their stories, I'm elevating communities' own stories and experiences. Then people say, "Oh, wow, I can see it really clear now. You've articulated it really clearly." So when I get a chance to share stories that tell the story of working across sectors in a holistic way, then people are really buy into the idea. But I find that organizations are often very constrained. They may have a very narrow model for what it is they're allowed to do, and a narrow set of capabilities for what they're able to do, or funding streams that restrict what they're allowed to do. And I see that time and again, whether it's when I speak to donors, when I speak to implementation organizations, when I speak to policymakers, that we're struggling to get out of our silos. And yet, the problems we need to solve today are not single sector problems. They are complex, multidimensional problems that need systems level solutions.
I wonder if one approach to solving that is that we is bringing together a few silos and then building doorways to those silos so each other has a chance to wander in and out of those silos. I share your thoughts on that, and I'm constantly thinking about how do we connect silos to the point where they become seamless and wallless, and and
yeah. So, I mean, and this is something I've spent an awful lot of time pondering myself, Gerry. And I think some of the answer is around uniting around a shared vision, and having the courage to understand that however good you are at your particular piece of the problem, solving the problem and honestly solving the problem is going to take more than one sector to solve. So it's about having honest conversations within those silos and between those silos, and saying, let's build a shared vision. It's about not being and I think some of the fear that I have experienced has come as a result of people thinking, oh my goodness, that means I've got to learn how to do something else as well. And my response to that is, no, you don't need to learn how to be a conservationist if you're a clinician, or you don't have to learn how to provide healthcare if you're a conservationist. You just need to learn how to collaborate skillfully and effectively. You need to learn with humility what each other brings to the table to help solve this shared problem. You need to articulate a shared goal.
Yeah, so indeed.
I think that's part of the solution.
Yeah, I guess along those lines, I wanted to ask you about a quote that I read where you said, and I'm going to just check on it to make sure I get it right. You said, women are telling us that well-being is a hidden topic, something that is holding them back from doing their work. And I see women as such a instrumental piece of this tearing silos down. I think women are they have a much greater proclivity towards connecting and working as a unit than I've ever found men to be. And so just explain that quote to me.
Sure.
Women are telling us that their well-being is a hidden topic. First of all, what that means, and then how it's holding them back from getting their work done.
Thank you, Gerry. So that takes us in a slightly different direction here. So the women I was talking about in that quote were not community members per se. These are women working as leaders in conservation. This is a cohort of all female grassroots conservation leaders from all over Southeast Asia. And I've had the privilege of working with them on a leadership development program and centering well-being as part of that leadership development. And what we found was that when we spoke to these inspiring, passionate, driven women about well-being, so often what I heard back was, I've never had the opportunity to consider my own well-being before. I've never been given permission to talk about well-being, about my own well-being. I've never been given permission to consider my own well-being. These are, I'm generalizing hugely, so please, everybody who's listening, forgive me for this. But so often we were seeing that these women were, the message they were internalizing was that they were there to serve. They were there to serve others. They were there to serve their communities. They were there to serve the mission. And this was layered on top of the narrative that we see in conservation, that you need to die for the cause anyway. So we already see that in conservation, that people live a life of self-sacrifice in order to serve a mission that's bigger than them. Then if you layer on top of that the conditioning about, that women are receiving, that actually their needs aren't as important as the needs of their community, aren't as important as the needs of their organization, then talking to them about their well-being was completely new for some of them, and actually was really unsettling for some of them. But when we dug deeper, actually we could see that some of them were burning out, some of them were really struggling, and they were keeping going with their work as best as they possibly could. But I saw how if we could support them to really thrive, then they would thrive and their work would benefit. So that's what I was referring to in that quote.
Wow. No, I'm so glad I asked you, because that raises so many questions in my brain. I wonder how much we need to have a well-being course that's applied to all nonprofit organizations, because you're absolutely right. There is this mindset of sacrifice it all.
Yes.
Don't get paid as much. You're here for the cause. Yes. Your individuality isn't as important as the mission. Yes. And you do see burnout.
Yeah, I'm having been in the sector 20 years, I've sadly seen quite a lot of it. Really sad. And I want to help create a world where actually the people who are doing the work are as important as the work itself. That we value ourselves as much as we value the mission. I would love to see that happen. And this idea that, dying for the cause, falling on your sword, ultimately it doesn't serve the mission. And as a doctor, first do no harm. So if you're working in a way that is harming you, then as a doctor, my belief is that's unethical practice. Yeah. And actually you matter as a conservationist, as a mission-driven organization and individual. And that's what I'd like to be doing more of. And when you add into that mix the fact there's huge gender inequality in conservation, and huge challenges for women in certain parts of the world because of gender norms, then you've got so much more work to do and so much more opportunity to right some of those wrongs. And what we see, one last point on that is that what we know is that when women are empowered to lead, communities flourish. We know this, and this is what I'm just echoing what you said earlier, Gerry, really.
I think you sort of answered the world you want right there. I love to end this podcast always with, well, tell us the world you want and how that is the world we all should want. And I think you hit on that line right in that last statement. So I want to end this a little bit differently. You said you were a stand-up comedian. How tell me about...
I was.
Well, maybe you still are. I don't know. But finish us off with how humor, because I was thinking about when you were describing well-being and connecting with the communities in southern Madagascar, and I was thinking about how much humor crosses ethnic boundaries and racial boundaries and all that. I've walked into communities and you can pantomime things and everybody starts to laugh. Everybody, connects. Right. How do you see humor as a comedian and as a doctor? How do you see humor as part of well-being?
As part of well-being. Wow. So I mean, there are probably fewer quick fixes to for well-being than a good laugh, right? There are, and we've known that since time immemorial. There are fewer quick fixes for easing tension than a good belly laugh. Shakespeare referred to it as comic relief. So we know that. I mean, and laughter is the best medicine. So we've known that from time immemorial. The power of a laugh, the power of humor, the power to ease tension, to help reframe, to help give perspective, to change our emotional state. I mean, humor does so many things, and building on that, what you've alluded to there, Gerry, humor can build bridges. Yeah, and I've felt that when I've gone into communities that I haven't known, and if we can reach a point where we're both laughing, I think we've got it. We've connected at some level, human to human. We've transcended all of these barriers that were staring me in the face 10 minutes ago, and we've connected. So and I do use that occasionally. And in the consulting room, I'm very nervous about using humor, because you do it badly, it doesn't, patients don't take kindly to that. But occasionally I use humor in the consulting room as well. And if I get it right, then it eases tension, it builds connection, it helps to foster trust. It's just wonderful. I love it.
Vik, I have totally loved this. This has been awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about all this stuff. And it is really such important stuff. But to end it on a smile which I know our audience can't quite see, but maybe we can get Demelza or Carrie, one of the producers, to grab a screenshot right now. We'll throw that up on the blog or things that accompany this. But thank you so much for doing this. So much of what you talked about is the world we want, that connection.
Thank you, Gerry. I couldn't agree more. And that connection, not just between people, but across all kinds of boundaries, whether it's human to human, human to animal, whatever it is. Ultimately we're all connected. Thanks, Gerry.
Special thanks to Dr. Vik Mohan, storyteller, teacher, conservationist, and physician, dedicated to a world with well-being at its heart. To learn more about Vik and about the world we want, visit our website at NAAEE.org/podcast. That's NAAEE.org/podcast. As you just heard, environmental education is as multifaceted as the diversity of guests on our podcast. To explore every element, subscribe to the World We Want podcast. There's a link on our website, or you can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. We would love to hear what you think. And if there's an aspect of environmental education you want to know more about, let us know. Email us at podcast@naaee.org. The World We Want podcast is a production of NAAEE, the North American Association for Environmental Education. I'd like to send a special thanks to our entire team, Carrie Albright, Judy Browse, Jimena Cueca, and Stacy Pierpoint, with additional production support from Globio. You can learn more about Globio at globio.org. And a special thanks to you for being a part of the world we want. A better world starts with each of us, together. I'm Gerry Ellis. For everyone at The World We Want, thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing The World We Want, the NAAEE podcast.